Amara had always carried herself with quiet dignity, but inside the grand mansion of her husband's family, she often felt like an unwelcome guest rather than a wife. The marble floors gleamed, chandeliers dripped with gold light, and servants rushed to attend to every command. Yet, in the midst of such wealth, Amara was made to feel small. Her in-laws rarely spoke to her directly. When they did, their words dripped with polite venom. "Such simple taste you have," her mother-in-law would remark, her eyes trailing disapprovingly over Amara's modest dress. At dinners, her sisters-in-law exchanged glances, whispering behind jeweled fingers. They never said it outright, but Amara knew what they thought, that she didn't belong. She had grown up in a modest neighborhood, raised by a mother who worked 2 jobs to put food on the table. Life had been hard, but those years had shaped her spirit into steel. It wasn't wealth that had given her strength. It was survival. Still, here in this house, surrounded by people who judged worth by bloodlines and bank accounts, her resilience seemed invisible. Her husband, David, tried at times to soften the cruelty. "Ignore them," he whispered whenever his family's words cut too deep. But his reluctance to confront them openly left Amara isolated. The silence of his support stung as much as his family's disdain. Evenings were the hardest. At family gatherings, Amara sat like a shadow, her voice drowned out by laughter and conversation that never included her. She would fold her hands neatly in her lap, smile when expected, and hide the storm brewing in her chest. Every night she told herself the same thing. "You are more than their opinions. You are more than their prejudice." Yet each insult was a pebble on her back, and the weight of disdain grew heavier with each passing day. Little did they know, Amara's silence was not weakness. It was patience. And soon, the world would see the strength they so foolishly dismissed. The breaking point came on a night that should have been ordinary. The family had gathered for one of their frequent dinners, a lavish affair where crystal glasses sparkled and silverware clinked softly against porcelain. Amara sat at the long mahogany table, her hands resting lightly in her lap, trying to appear composed as the conversation flowed around her. Her sister-in-law leaned forward, her smile sharp as glass. "Tell me, Amara," she said sweetly, "do you ever feel out of place here? I mean, growing up where you did. This must all feel overwhelming." The table erupted with muffled chuckles. Amara's cheeks burned, but she kept her gaze steady. "No," she replied calmly. "I feel quite at home. Kindness, after all, doesn't require wealth." The smile on her sister-in-law's face faltered, but her mother-in-law quickly interjected, her voice dripping with condescension. "Oh, how noble! Though really, dear, one must admit that certain refinements cannot be learned." The words landed like daggers. Amara's fork slipped against her plate, the scrape ringing louder than it should have. David reached for her hand under the table, but his grip was tentative, weak, more an apology than support. His silence cut deeper than the insult. For the rest of the meal, Amara's food went untouched. She forced herself to endure the laughter, the subtle sneers, the sense of being dissected under their gaze. By the time the plates were cleared, her chest felt like it might burst. That night, alone in her room, she finally let the tears fall. Not just from pain but from anger. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, eyes swollen yet fierce, and whispered to herself, "No more." In that quiet vow, something shifted. She would not crumble under their cruelty. She would not allow herself to be defined by their narrow vision. They thought she was invisible, a shadow in their glittering world, but she would prove them wrong. The Millionaire's banquet was only weeks away, and it would be the stage where Amara's silence ended, and her strength began to shine. The announcement came at breakfast. Amara's father-in-law, his voice brimming with pride, declared that they would be hosting the annual Millionaire's banquet at the estate. It was to be their most important event of the year, a gathering of business leaders, politicians, and the city's elite. Her mother-in-law's eyes flicked toward Amara with thinly veiled disdain. "Of course you'll be there," she said, her tone making it sound more like an obligation than an invitation. But do keep it simple. We wouldn't want distractions. Her sisters-in-law exchanged smirks, already envisioning her in something plain, forgettable, overshadowed by their glittering gowns. The message was clear. Amara was to remain a background figure, invisible among the wealthy. But Amara had had enough of invisibility. As the days passed, she began to prepare in her own quiet way. She visited a small boutique downtown, far from the designer labels her in-laws worshipped. There, she found a gown that spoke to her spirit, elegant, flowing, stitched with care rather than extravagance. It wasn't loud or ostentatious, but it was powerful in its simplicity. When she tried it on, she felt a strength ripple through her, as though the fabric itself had been made for this very night. Beyond the dress, Amara prepared herself inwardly. She recalled her mother's lessons about walking with pride, no matter the ground beneath her feet. She remembered the years of struggle, the jobs she worked to support her family, the resilience that hardship had carved into her bones. She thought of the countless nights she had endured her in-laws' cruelty, each insult hardening her resolve. In the evenings, when the house was quiet, she stood before the mirror, practicing her smile, not one of forced politeness, but one that reflected her inner power. She spoke softly to her reflection. You belong. You are enough. The night of the banquet crept closer, and whispers filled the house as her in-laws plotted how they would shine before the city's elite. They had no idea that the woman they dismissed so easily was preparing not just to attend, but to rise. Amara was no longer waiting for their approval. She was preparing to claim her place. The night of the banquet arrived with the estate glowing like a palace. Golden chandeliers lit the grand hall, their light scattering across crystal glasses and polished silver. Laughter rang through the air as tuxedos and gowns swept across the marble floors. The in-laws fluttered about, basking in compliments, certain they owned the night. Amara lingered at the top of the staircase, her heart thudding like a drum. For a brief moment, doubt whispered, "What if they're right? What if I don't belong here?" But then she breathed deeply, remembering her vow. She wasn't walking into their world, she was stepping fully into her own. The music shifted, and she began her descent. Conversations faltered. One by one, heads turned. The gown she had chosen shimmered softly under the lights, not gaudy, but commanding in its elegance. Every step she took was steady, her chin lifted, her smile calm yet radiant. For the first time, she wasn't trying to blend into the shadows. She was the light drawing every eye. Her sisters-in-law gaped, their painted smiles stiffening. Her mother-in-law's glass nearly slipped from her hand. Even David, her husband, stared with wide eyes as though seeing her anew. Whispers spread quickly through the crowd. Who is she? That's his wife. My God, she's stunning. What had been meant as her humiliation had become her stage. Amara walked gracefully into the room, greeting guests with warmth and poise. She did not shrink when introduced to politicians and CEOs. Instead, she met them with the confidence of someone who knew her worth. People leaned in to hear her speak, drawn by the sincerity in her voice, the quiet strength behind her words. Her in-laws, once so eager to showcase their own grandeur, now faded into the background. The woman they had tried to silence was commanding the room with nothing but presence. By the time she reached David's side, the tide of the night had shifted. He looked at her with awe, pride mixing with regret for the times he had not defended her. But Amara didn't need his validation anymore. She knew, as did everyone in that glittering hall, that she had arrived, not as an outsider, but as the star. Dinner was served beneath the glow of chandeliers, the clinking of glasses punctuating the low hum of conversation. Amara sat at the long banquet table, poised and graceful, though she could feel the weight of her in-laws' eyes on her. Their smiles were tight, brittle, as if they were waiting for her to falter. Her sister-in-law struck first. Raising her glass, she said sweetly, "To family, and to those who, despite a humble beginnings, managed to keep up with us." The room chuckled lightly, though a few guests frowned at the veiled insult. Amara's heart pounded, but she remained silent, her smile calm. It was not yet her moment. Then, as the evening progressed, the host announced that each family member would offer a few words about legacy and vision. Amara's in-laws stiffened. Clearly, they hadn't expected her to be included. Her mother-in-law leaned close and whispered sharply, "Just keep it brief. No need to embarrass yourself." Amara rose slowly, smoothing her gown. For a heartbeat, the hall seemed to hold its breath. She began softly, her voice steady. "When I think of legacy, I don't think of money or titles. Those can fade. I think of resilience. I think of my mother, who worked tirelessly to give me an education. I think of the countless people who start with nothing but their will to rise. Legacy is not what we inherit, it's what we build." The room fell silent. Guests leaned in, captivated by her words. She spoke not with arrogance, but with authenticity that pierced through the glittering facade of wealth. "True greatness," she continued, "is measured not by how high we stand, but by how many we lift along the way." When she finished, the applause erupted, loud and genuine. Influential guests rose to their feet, clapping, their eyes shining with admiration. Her in-laws sat frozen, their smug expressions wiped clean. The words they had used to wound her had become the very stage upon which she triumphed. In that moment, Amara was no longer the woman they had sought to diminish. She was the voice of the night, and nothing, not their wealth, not their status, could overshadow her light. As the applause rippled through the hall, Amara felt the weight of years of humiliation begin to lift from her shoulders. She returned to her seat with quiet composure, though her heart thrummed like a drum inside her chest. She hadn't spoken for applause, yet the standing ovation had crowned her the true star of the night. Almost immediately, a distinguished man in a tailored suit approached her table. He was the head of a major foundation, known for his influence and philanthropy. "Mrs. Daniels," he said warmly, "your words tonight were extraordinary. We need voices like yours on our board, voices that remind us of what really matters." His compliment drew murmurs of agreement from those nearby. Soon, others followed. A prominent businesswoman offered her card, praising Amara's wisdom. A senator leaned down to shake her hand, remarking that her speech had touched something deeper than politics or wealth. It had reminded everyone of humanity. Everywhere she turned, she was met with admiration, her name spoken with respect. Her in-laws, however, sat in stunned silence. Their carefully orchestrated evening, meant to showcase their power, had been stolen by the very woman they sought to diminish. Her sisters-in-law shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their smiles frozen. Her mother-in-law tried to regain composure, but her eyes betrayed disbelief. David, sitting beside Amara, finally found his voice. He squeezed her hand firmly and said, "I should have defended you long ago. Tonight, you showed me, and everyone here, what true strength looks like." For the first time, his words felt sincere, stripped of hesitation. As the evening wore on, Amara moved through the crowd with ease, engaging in conversations that brimmed with possibility. People weren't drawn to her wealth. She had none compared to those around her. They were drawn to her authenticity, her resilience, her light. By the end of the night, it was clear. Amara had claimed a respect that no amount of cruelty could erase. The woman once dismissed as unworthy now stood at the center of admiration, a living testament that dignity and courage outshine even the brightest chandeliers. And her in-laws could do nothing but watch. When the last guests departed and the hall grew quiet, Amara slipped away to the terrace overlooking the gardens. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of roses. She leaned against the railing, exhaling deeply, as though finally releasing years of silent endurance. Behind her, footsteps approached. It was her mother-in-law, her face pale, her voice uncharacteristically restrained. "You surprised us tonight," she said stiffly. There was no apology, only the bare acknowledgement that something undeniable had shifted. Amara met her gaze, calm and steady. "No," she replied softly. I didn't surprise you. You only refused to see me for who I am. The older woman had no response. She turned away, leaving Amara alone again beneath the stars. And that silence, that lack of rebuttal, was sweeter than any apology could have been. It was surrender. David soon joined her, remorse etched into his features. I should have stood by you, he admitted, his voice low. I let their cruelty go unchecked. I let you feel alone. Amara studied him, searching for sincerity. This time, she found it. Then stand by me now, she said simply. And he nodded, as though vowing to never falter again. But for Amara, the night wasn't about her husband or her in-laws. It was about herself. She had walked into that hall a woman they dismissed, and she had walked out the woman they could no longer ignore. She realized then that triumph was never about revenge. It was about rising above, about choosing grace over bitterness, dignity over despair. She hadn't just stolen the spotlight. She had proven that her worth had never depended on their approval. As the moonlight bathed her in silver, Amara smiled. She was no longer the victim of their disdain. She was the victor of her own story, an inspiration to anyone who had ever been told they weren't enough. And from that night on, she carried her crown not of jewels, but of resilience wherever she went.